Lin Feng did not leave immediately. He began to make follow-up arrangements. Arrangement had to be made. Hence, he formulated a plan and set off in 3 days. During these 3 days, apart from making some arrangements, the most important thing for Lin Feng was to take stock of his gains this time. Apart from the large amount of world origin obtained from Emperor Strange and the indefinite sect master, Emperor Strange's spatial disk was what Lin Feng valued the most. This disk was filled with the aura of space. Lin Feng called it the spatial disk. In the past, relying on the spatial disk, Emperor Strange was unafraid when facing 2-star entities, and could even escape. There were 9 grids on the spatial disk, and 5 of them were still lit. However, one of the 5 grids was only faintly discernible, and seemed ready to disappear. Could it be that every time the spatial disk is used, a grid will disappear? Does it represent an opportunity to warp space? Lin Feng had seen Emperor Strange use the spatial disk with his own eyes. The first time, Emperor Strange had successfully escaped. This time, Lin Feng used the radiant moon plate to confine him, which prevented Emperor Strange from escaping. Hence, one of the grids was activated, but he did not escape. The spatial power was still left in the spatial disk, which was why it was faintly discernible and in a semi-activated state. Let me give it a try. Even though it was a little wasteful, Lin Feng still had to figure out the use of the spatial disk. Hence, he began to infuse the power of worlds into the spatial disk, focusing it on the faintly discernible grid. Buzz. A strange power enveloped Lin Feng. It appeared to be a special type of rules. Then, Lin Feng disappeared from the secret chamber at once. This is a spatial passage? Lin Feng warped through the pitch-black spatial passage, but it seemed a little different. Actually, with Lin Feng's current strength, if he encountered some kiliocosm domains with no restrictions on space, he could still warp through space by force. However, that was under the premise that there was space. In a place without space like the dark domain, it was impossible to warp. Still, this spatial passage was completely different. It seemed to be very stable, overriding all the rules, and did not seem to have any connection with the other rules. Lin Feng could sense that through this spatial passage, he could go anywhere in the kiliocosm domain. However, Lin Feng vaguely sensed that the power was about to disappear. Once the power that enveloped it disappeared, he would fall out of the spatial passage. At this thought, Lin Feng simply took the initiative to fall out of the spatial passage. Swoosh! When Lin Feng appeared again, he appeared in an unfamiliar kiliocosm domain. Huh? This is the Opulent Lodge. Lin Feng was shocked. He did not expect the spatial disk to actually bring him to the Opulent Lodge. He picked up the spatial disk and looked at it. Among the 9 grids on it, that faintly discernible grid had completely dimmed. There were only 4 grids left. Through this test, Lin Feng also understood how to use the spatial disk. Every grid represented an opportunity to warp space. Just now, Lin Feng had exhausted the faintly discernible grid and warped to the Opulent Lodge. This distance could no longer be considered short. It was actually very far. Moreover, Lin Feng could sense that the faintly discernible grid did not actually contain much spatial power. If it was a complete lit grid, he would definitely be able to warp further. The rules of space. Lin Feng looked at the spatial disk repeatedly and muttered softly. Compared to the spatial disk, Lin Feng was actually more concerned about the rules contained in the spatial disk. They should be rules of space, and that pitch-black passage should be a spatial passage. However, this spatial passage seemed to be completely different from other spatial passages. This was a passage that overrode all kiliocosm domains, and could allow one to traverse the entire small kiliocosm. Lin Feng had a vague feeling that if he wanted to travel through the entire small kiliocosm, he could only do so through this spatial passage. Moreover, this spatial passage was incomparably stable. These were the rules of space of the small kiliocosm. Lin Feng called it the Supreme Spatial Passage. Perhaps there were also spatial passages in kiliocosm domains, but they only allowed warping through the kiliocosm domain. For example, there were no kiliocosm spatial passages in the dark domain, so ordinary spatial warps were not possible. However, just because there were no spatial passages in the kiliocosm domain did not mean that there was no supreme spatial passage. Lin Feng did not need to try to assert that even in the dark domain, he could activate the spatial disk and warp successfully. The supreme spatial passage was above the spatial passage of the kiliocosm domain, and it was incomparably stable. As long as nothing went wrong in the small kiliocosm, this supreme spatial passage could be used at any time, and no rules could interfere with it. Even Lin Feng's rules of time could not interfere with the rules of space on the spatial disk. The supreme spatial passage and the river of spacetime, what's the difference between the two? Or rather, what's the connection? At first, Lin Feng had thought that the river of spacetime was a combination of the rules of time and the rules of space. But now that he had obtained the spatial disk after testing it, he realized that it's completely different. Spacetime was spacetime. It was not as simple as putting time and space together. Spacetime was a whole, and could not be divided. Lin Feng only had the rules of time for the time being, and had yet to master the mysteries of spacetime. Now, he also had the spatial disk. Although it did not seem to have much to do with the mystery of spacetime, the benefits of mastering the rules of space were obvious. If he could master the supreme rules of space, he could travel anywhere in the small kiliocosm through the supreme spatial passage. At that time, wouldn't it be easy for Lin Feng to collect boundary stones? He could arrive anywhere in an instant, and send countless avatars to various places to collect boundary stones with a thought. How carefree was that? No matter how strong a supremacy was, even a 3-star supremacy probably could not do anything to an expert who had grasped the supreme rules of space. However, Lin Feng had yet to even comprehend the basics of the rules of space. He only had the spatial disk which he could slowly study in the future. He just had a greater chance of comprehending the supreme rules of space than others. Lin Feng glanced at the opulent lodge again. His arrival did not alarm anyone. This place seemed to be empty, save for a kiliocosm domain in the distance. Lin Feng knew very well that the opulent lodge was a colossus he would have to face in the future. However, now was not the time. As long as the opulent lodge did not fall out with them on the surface, Lin Feng was happy to maintain the status quo. Time. Lin Feng also needed a large amount of time to accumulate power. Falling out with the opulent lodge now was not a good thing for Lin Feng. Soon, perhaps the next time, the opulent lodge won't come covertly. Lin Feng took a long look at the opulent lodge, then transformed into a stream of light and flew into the distance. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. 3 days later, referring to the kiliocosm domain map, Lin Feng successfully arrived at an unfamiliar area. This is the place. Lin Feng left his residence silently alone. Following the guidance of the kiliocosm domain map, he arrived at this place marked Forbidden Death Zone by the Supremacy Elders of the First Light. Lin Feng looked over and saw a dilapidated kiliocosm domain. According to Supremacy Round Heart, there was not just one dilapidated kiliocosm domain in this area, but many of them. No one seemed to understand how so many kiliocosm domains could be connected. Moreover, even the occasional fluctuation of rules from inside seemed to be shocking, indirectly confirming that this area was extraordinary. This was once an ancient battlefield. Lin Feng closed his eyes. He sensed the occasional rules emitted by the Forbidden Death Zone. These rules were all broken rules, but they contained the aura of death. Lin Feng could even sense the brutal state of that battle back then. Be it the Forbidden Death Zone, an ancient battlefield, or just an unfamiliar region, since Lin Feng had already arrived here, he would not give up halfway. He had to go in and take a look himself. Swoosh! Lin Feng took a step forward and walked directly into this ancient battlefield. The dense and complicated rules of the various kiliocosm domains almost overlapped. As soon as Lin Feng stepped in, they appeared ready to rip him into pieces like a meat grinder. Such terrifying rules. Even if they're just broken rules, anyone below the level of 2-star will probably be severely injured unless they have the defense of a special supreme treasure. As time goes on, they might even fall. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. He had already tried his best to overestimate this ancient battlefield, but as soon as he stepped into this ancient battlefield, he still felt that he had underestimated it. It was indeed worthy of the name Forbidden Death Zone, given by the Supremacy Elders of the First Light. Without special preparation, entering this place was indeed like entering a dead zone. Back then, Supremacy First Light also had to rely on the radiant moon plate to withstand the pressure, which was the only reason he was able to venture slightly deeper into this ancient battlefield. Even so, Supremacy First Light could only wander around the periphery of the ancient battlefield and could not venture deep. Even the radiant moon plate might not be able to withstand the various Kiliacosm domain rules of this ancient battlefield for a long time. Lin Feng did not bring the radiant moon plate with him this time. Firstly, with Lin Feng's strength, this radiant moon plate was actually not of much help. If the radiant moon plate could withstand something, Lin Feng could also withstand it. If the radiant moon plate could not withstand something, Lin Feng might still be able to withstand it through all kinds of abilities. Secondly, it was also because the current situation was tense. In the entire First Light, Lin Feng was the only two-star supremacy. Although Lin Feng felt that the Opulent Lodge definitely would not act rashly unless they were confident of success, it was better to be safe than sorry. With Supremacy Roundheart carrying the Radiant Moon Plate, even if they encountered a two-star supremacy, they could hold out for a period of time. Could be considered foolproof. Hence, for various reasons, Lin Feng did not bring the Radiant Moon Plate with him this time. He could only rely on his internal Kiliacosm domain to resist the power head-on. However, Lin Feng had a better method. It had to be known that Lin Feng was a two-star supremacy with 170 million worlds. His internal Kiliacosm domain had become 10 times stronger than before. Relatively, Lin Feng's Kiliacosm domain rules had also become much stronger. Hence, even if Lin Feng did not control them, the Kiliacosm domain rules in his body would be emitted naturally, and those were the rules of time. The rules of time were one of the most mysterious types of rules. Hence, they were only emitted naturally, and did not even require much consumption. The rules of time protected Lin Feng's entire body. The ancient battlefield was filled with all kinds of broken Kiliacosm domain rules. As soon as they approached Lin Feng, they were blocked by the rules of time. Those broken Kiliacosm domain rules could not approach him at all. They were even more effective than the Radiant Moon Plate, as expected of one of the most mysterious types of rules. Even in terms of defense, the rules of time are still one of the strongest. Lin Feng praised from the bottom of his heart. In reality, it was not just about defense. There were many other uses for the rules of time. Defense was just a different method of use. The surface of Lin Feng's body maintained the effect of stopping time. Any power that approached, be it rules or physical attacks, would be enveloped by the rules of time and stopped instantly. This was equivalent to defense, and it was better than any defensive ability. Considering the current state of Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain, supporting this meager consumption was simply not worth mentioning. With this level of consumption, it would not be a problem for him to hold out for billions of years. Lin Feng slowly went deeper. He vaguely sensed a vortex ahead. These vortices blotted out everything as they swept over majestically. Anything that was swept into them was ground into dust. Even Lin Feng could not help but be shocked. This power was only a little residual aftershock, but if he resisted it head-on, he would have to consume a lot of power. Those below the level of 2-star would die upon contact, which was very terrifying. Lin Feng also avoided the brunt of it for the time being and hurriedly dodged. Although he had the ability to destroy it, there was no need to exhaust the power in his body. The gains would not make up for the losses at all. After the terrifying vortex storm, Lin Feng saw densely packed boundary stones. So many boundary stones! Lin Feng was overjoyed. He reached out and grabbed all the boundary stones in that area. These boundary stones were of high quality. There were thousands of them in just a small area. Normally, even in an ordinary Kiliacosm domain, Lin Feng would have to search for a long time, travel a long distance, and go to many places before he could plunder thousands of boundary stones. But now, Lin Feng had just entered this ancient battlefield, and he already had such gains. It seemed like the nature of this ancient battlefield was really as Supremacy Roundheart had claimed. Boundary stones were simply ubiquitous and very common. Huh? The rules contained in these boundary stones seemed to be different. Lin Feng observed these boundary stones carefully and vaguely realized that the rules contained in these boundary stones were all different. According to Lin Feng's speculation, boundary stones were formed from some special substances after combining with the rules of the chiliocosm domain. Worlds that failed to form might also develop into boundary stones. However, no matter what, they were related to rules. In the past, the rules contained in the boundary stones in a chiliocosm domain were all the same. They were all the rules of the chiliocosm domain. But now, the rules of almost every boundary stone were different. This meant that there was definitely not just one, but many types of rules that formed these boundary stones. Lin Feng looked up at his surroundings again. There were all kinds of disordered and broken rules everywhere. He seemed to have vaguely grasped something. There are so many broken chiliocosm domain rules here, constantly entangling, wreaking havoc, and being combined with certain special substances. Hence, an excellent environment for the development of boundary stones is formed. Lin Feng felt that his guess was basically close to the mark. It was precisely because there were all kinds of broken rules that constantly entangled and wreaked havoc that boundary stones were formed. It was extremely difficult for such a special environment to form, but such a special environment was present almost everywhere in this ancient battlefield. Such a place could only be chanced upon by luck. To Lin Feng, it was simply a holy land for cultivation. Let me see how many boundary stones there are. Lin Feng also grew excited. It had been a long time since he had felt excited. Now, seeing so many boundary stones, how could he not be thrilled? It had to be known that he had just arrived at this ancient battlefield. Hence, Lin Feng continued to venture deeper and began to collect the boundary stones. Along the way, this ancient battlefield did not disappoint Lin Feng. As he plundered along the way, the more he encountered rule storms, the deeper he wanted to venture. Often, the more chaotic the rules and the stronger the storm, the more boundary stones there would be, and the higher the quality. Of course, if the rule storm was very fierce, it meant that there was a trace of danger, and the risk factor would become higher and higher. However, Lin Feng was a 2-star supremacy, so this little amount of danger was not a big deal. From 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000. In a short period of time, Lin Feng's gains were considerable. In less than an hour, he had already obtained 10,000 boundary stones. This was simply no different from getting freebies. Of course, even if they were freebies, it still depended on the person. Back then, the people who discovered this ancient battlefield were the people from the First Light, but in the end, only Supremacy First Light had entered it. As for the others, they did not dare to enter even if they wanted to. Even if they wanted freebies, they must have the strength. Otherwise, they would be torn to pieces by the chaotic rule storms before they could reach here at all. However, Lin Feng was still dissatisfied. It was just 10,000 boundary stones. Perhaps in the past, he would have been overjoyed, but now it was really not worth mentioning. Lin Feng wanted at least 1 million, or even more than 10 million boundary stones. This was the only way to quickly increase his strength. Hence, Lin Feng expanded the range of his search and continued to venture deeper to collect the boundary stones. Boom! Suddenly, Lin Feng felt a strong fluctuation in front of him. Even he sensed danger from this fluctuation. Immediately after, a terrifying shockwave swept towards Lin Feng majestically. This is bad. Stop time. Lin Feng was shocked. This shockwave was extremely terrifying. Even Lin Feng with ordinary rules of time would probably be torn apart upon encountering it. The rules of time were not omnipotent. If something exceeded the limit of the current rules of time, the rules of time would also be torn apart. This was the case for this shockwave. Lin Feng had to take the initiative to strengthen the rules of time. He would even mobilize all the power in his internal chiliocosm domain at all costs to unleash the rules of time and stop this fluctuation. Buzz! The mighty shockwave suddenly enveloped Lin Feng. When this shockwave swept over, it was too fast and the range was too wide. Even if he wanted to dodge, he had nowhere to hide. He could only resist it head-on. Only as the shockwave swept over majestically did Lin Feng truly realize the danger. The rules of time he mobilized at full force seemed to be fluctuating, like ripples in water, receiving a violent impact. Any of the shockwaves that approached Lin Feng would be stilled. However, those shockwaves were infinite. They came wave after wave, and every wave of impact was very terrifying. Hence, even Lin Feng was enduring a huge burden. What kind of rules are so powerful? Even the rules of a living 2-star supremacy are not so powerful. Could it be the rules of a 3-star supremacy? Lin Feng was incomparably shocked. He had seen 2-star supremacies before, and killed 2-star celestial devil emperors before. However, be it 2-star supremacies or 2-star celestial devil emperors, their Kiliacosm domain rules or celestial devil's force fields were not as daunting. However, was it possible for this to belong to a 3-star supremacy? Lin Feng had never seen a 3-star supremacy before, not even in legends. From what Lin Feng knew, many celestial devil emperors or 2-star supremacies had actually never seen a 3-star supremacy. It was hard to say if there were any 3-star supremacies in this small Kiliacosm. No one could guarantee that there were definitely 3-star supremacies. After all, the standard of a 3-star supremacy was the power of half a Kiliacosm. That was not half a world, nor was it half a Kiliacosm domain, but half a small Kiliacosm. It was precisely because he had never seen or heard of one that Lin Feng elevated his evaluation of a 3-star supremacy infinitely. The shockwaves formed by these broken rules were so terrifying. Moreover, it had been countless years since their death. If even the remnant rules were so terrifying, how strong must the complete rules be? Hence, Lin Feng had this hypothesis. However, whether it was a 3-star supremacy or not, Lin Feng had to survive this crisis first. Fortunately, Lin Feng was also a 2-star supremacy. The 170 million worlds in his body mobilized the Kiliacosm domain rules in a frenzy, while also enduring a huge burden. Maintaining the stop of time would not consume much of the rules of time, so Lin Feng could afford enduring it over time. He did not believe that these remnant shockwaves could last for long. As time passed, Lin Feng felt as if he was resisting a violent storm. He held out desperately as the storm wreaked havoc. After a few hours, finally, the power of the shockwave seemed to have weakened a little. Gradually, the shockwave dissipated. Only then did Lin Feng heave a sigh of relief. However, the condition of his body was not too good. Still, he had finally withstood the shockwave this time. Just now, he had really felt the threat of death. I didn't expect this ancient battlefield to be so dangerous. Forget about a 1-star supremacy. Even a 2-star supremacy might fall if they enter. Lin Feng still had lingering fears. After he became a 2-star supremacy, he had even killed the indefinite sect master, who was also a 2-star entity. He could be considered very confident. In addition, he had the rules of time. He felt that even in the boundless Kiliacosm domain, no power could threaten him anymore. He could go anywhere in the world. But now he had completely come to his senses. He had only just entered the realm of a 2-star supremacy. There were huge differences even among 2-star supremacies. Not to mention the gap between 2- and 3-star entities. It was unimaginable. Lin Feng did not have invincible strength, nor was he qualified to relax. This was especially the case on this ancient battlefield. Even some remnant rule storms might be able to kill Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng quickly caught on. His eyes gradually lit up as he muttered in a low voice, "Such a terrifying rule storm. If boundary stones are produced within, how many boundary stones must there be?" Lin Feng's heart burned with desire. Wealth was found in perilous odds. He was not sure if such a rule shockwave still existed, but even if it did, he could still withstand it in his current state. Hence, he quickly flew forward. Not long after, Lin Feng saw a dilapidated Kiliacosm domain corridor appear in front of him. Boundary stones floated densely in the Kiliacosm domain corridor. One of the boundary stones was more than 10 times larger than ordinary boundary stones. It was surrounded by many boundary stones, emitting powerful rule fluctuations. This is a 1-star boundary stone. Moreover, it's not an ordinary 1-star boundary stone. Its quality is so high that it's almost comparable to a 2-star boundary stone. A 1-star boundary stone. Although it was not as rare as a 2-star boundary stone, it was also not that easy to obtain. In particular, the quality of this one-star boundary stone was very high. At the very least, if he used this one-star boundary stone, he could open up a kiliocosm domain of about 80 million worlds. That was 80 million, not 80,000. This was an entire different realm from ordinary one-star boundary stones. The one-star boundary stones that Lin Feng bestowed to Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, Supremacy Fura, and the others only had a limit of about 100,000 worlds. In other words, in the future, if Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, and the others wanted to improve further, they would have to continue to exchange for higher quality one-star boundary stones. There were also a lot of differences between one-star boundary stones. Normally, they were divided into tiers of 10,000 worlds, 100,000 worlds, 1 million worlds, and 10 million worlds. Ordinary one-star boundary stones were at the level of 10,000 worlds. A slightly better one would be at the 100,000 level. If it was even better, it would be a boundary stone of the million level. As for a 10 million level boundary stone, it was simply a rare treasure that could only be chanced upon by luck. The boundary stone Lin Feng was looking at now was the boundary stone at the level of 10 million worlds. Moreover, it was considered top-notch among boundary stones of the 10 million level. It could accommodate about 80 million worlds. Even the one-star boundary stone in Supremacy Round Heart's body, which was currently second only to Lin Feng, was actually at the 10 million level. However, he did not even have 70 million worlds. The limit was more than 60 million worlds. That was not even comparable to the quality of the boundary stone in front of Lin Feng. Even with the foundation of the First Light, it was difficult for them to find such a top-notch one-star boundary stone, let alone for other controllers. Only Supremacy First Light had obtained a 90 million level one-star boundary stone by chance back then, which established his illustrious reputation, and also caused the ambition in Supremacy First Light's heart to expand. A boundary stone at the level of 10 million worlds, and of top-notch quality at that, was something Lin Feng had never seen before. But now it had appeared in front of Lin Feng. Swoosh! Lin Feng did not stand on ceremony. He reached out and grabbed this 10 million level boundary stone. As expected, violent rule fluctuations were emitted by this boundary stone, just like the previous shockwave. From the looks of it, this 10 million level one-star boundary stone must have been slowly formed by that shockwave of rules over time. Only in such a special environment could so many boundary stones of such high quality be produced. I really wonder how powerful the owner of these rules was when he was alive. Lin Feng could not help but exclaim. After putting away this 10 million level one-star boundary stone, he continued to collect other slightly inferior boundary stones. There were no more one-star boundary stones, but there were still many boundary stones of other qualities, and their qualities were not bad. In just a few hours, Lin Feng had obtained a total of 100,000 boundary stones. Actually, if that 10 million level one-star boundary stone was included, and if Lin Feng really devoured it together, just this 10 million level boundary stone alone could grow tens of millions of worlds. Hence, although he only had 110,000 boundary stones, and did not seem to have gained much, one had to keep in mind that a 10 million level one-star boundary stone could only be chanced upon by luck. Its high quality was comparable to tens of millions of ordinary boundary stones. This place is too dangerous. I should leave for the time being. Lin Feng had yet to decide if he should devour this 10 million level one-star boundary stone. After all, it was too precious. If he bestowed it to his subordinates, as long as they had enough resources, it was possible for a one-star supremacy that was even stronger than Supremacy Round Heart to appear. That way, Lin Feng would also have someone available to handle matters in the future. However, Lin Feng was also a little reluctant to part with such a 10 million level one-star boundary stone. Although he was very strong now and was already a 2-star supremacy, this 10 million level one-star boundary stone could still greatly increase Lin Feng's strength. After some thought, Lin Feng eventually made a decision. He would devour this 10 million level one-star boundary stone first. After all, Lin Feng's top priority now was to increase his strength. As for his subordinates, he would let them improve in the future. As long as his strength could constantly increase, he would be able to find more one-star boundary stones. Devour! Lin Feng swallowed the 10 million level one-star boundary stone and the 110,000 boundary stones into his internal kiliocosm domain. The countless roots of the chaotic lotus stabbed into the boundary stones one after another, and began to absorb the energy in them. Gradually, worlds were born one after another. As he had a one-star boundary stone, what grew out was not worlds, but a kiliocosm domain. This kiliocosm domain was unprecedentedly massive. Even if Lin Feng had time acceleration, it would take a period of time for it to completely grow out. However, according to Lin Feng's estimation, this kiliocosm domain was probably equivalent to about 80 million worlds. How terrifying was that? A 10 million level boundary stone had increased Lin Feng's combat power by 80 million worlds. Of course, it would take a long time for it to grow completely, and also a very large amount of world origin. Fortunately, Lin Feng had killed Emperor Strange and the Indefinite Sect Master, a 2-star Celestial Devil Emperor, previously. It was how he could successfully nurture such a huge kiliocosm domain and digest such a high-grade 1-star boundary stone at the 10 million level. Otherwise, even if he obtained such a high-grade 1-star boundary stone at the 10 million level, he would not be able to convert it into combat power for the time being. If I can find more high-quality boundary stones, even if there are fewer of them, it won't be a big deal. However, the higher the quality of the boundary stones, the stronger the rule storm would probably be in that place. I'll encounter a certain amount of trouble, or even danger. Lin Feng was also weighing the pros and cons inwardly. This mysterious ancient battlefield was an opportunity for Lin Feng, but it also contained danger. The rule shockwaves this time was a reminder to Lin Feng. There might really be entities on this ancient battlefield who could make even Lin Feng feel threatened, or someone he could not resist. Hence, he had to be careful. However, wealth was found in perilous odds. After obtaining such a high-quality 10 million level 1-star boundary stone, Lin Feng had already forgotten himself a little in his happiness. Even if there was some danger, he was willing to take the risk. Moreover, Lin Feng still had the spatial disk and his trump card, the spacetime imprint. No matter how dangerous it was, the possibility of dying was minuscule. Lin Feng gradually made up his mind. However, he also maintained his rationality. In such an environment, the more strength he had, the more benefits he could obtain. Hence, the most important thing after obtaining the boundary stone was to convert it into strength first. In the Opulent Lodge, Supremacy 7 Treasures listed an area of the Opulent Lodge headquarters as a forbidden place. No one was allowed to enter. Moreover, news was completely sealed, and no one was allowed to pass news of this area out. Everything is ready. This time, absolutely no one can launch a sneak attack on this place. No one can disrupt the Ascension passage anymore. All of the preparations that Supremacy 7 Treasures had made was actually to welcome the Ascension passage. He had already received news from the medium kiliocosm. The Ascension passage would open in the near future. Once the Ascension passage was opened, the strength of the Opulent Lodge would increase explosively. At that time, the first light would be nothing. Unfortunately, once the Ascension passage was opened, the mystery of time on Lin Feng would probably not be exclusive to Supremacy 7 Treasures anymore. However, this was nothing much. If he could not have it all to himself, so be it. Even if it was the mystery of time, Supremacy 7 Treasures did not think that he would definitely be able to comprehend it. Many people who had fortuitous encounters could not comprehend the subject, even if they were forced to. Only specific people could comprehend specific rules at a specific time. As one of the most mysterious types of rules, time was probably no exception. Lin Feng could master the mystery of time by chance, but others might not be able to do so. If it was so easy to comprehend, great kiliocosm sovereigns would have comprehended it long ago. Why would they wait until now? Supremacy 7 Treasures' thoughts were in a mess. A few days passed. Boom! Suddenly, the void seemed to be torn apart. A powerful force seemed to shake the entire small kiliocosm. Supremacy 7 Treasures could clearly feel that the infinite power of the small kiliocosm in the area in front of him seemed to have gathered. However, it still could not resist that unseen force. That power was vast, profound, and invincible. No matter how the power of the small kiliocosm attacked, it was useless. A passage was forcefully chiseled out. This was the Ascension passage. Following the Ascension passage, Supremacy 7 Treasures could clearly sense that at the end of the passage, there was an even stronger power that could even overwhelm the small kiliocosm. It was as if it was also the tip of the iceberg of a world. Supremacy 7 Treasures was thrilled. He knew that it was the medium kiliocosm. The Ascension passage has finally been opened. I wonder which supremacies the headquarters will send this time. Looking at this Ascension passage, Supremacy 7 Treasures was also speculating. Of course, the Ascension passage still needed time to slowly stabilize, but it was just a matter of time. The most difficult part, opening the passage, had already been accomplished. The next step was to slowly stabilize it, before the headquarters would send controllers down. Supremacy 7 Treasures recalled the many supremacies at the opulent lodge headquarters. Even he was not sure how many experts would be sent down this time. What Supremacy 7 Treasures needed to do now was to wait quietly and guard against someone destroying the Ascension passage like last time. Boom! After such a long time, he had finally successfully nurtured a kiliocosm domain. It was a kiliocosm domain equivalent to 80 million worlds. Even Lin Feng was awed by such an enormous kiliocosm domain. He did not even care about the hundreds of thousands of worlds produced within. Coupled with such a huge kiliocosm domain, there were actually a total of 3 different kiliocosm domains in Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain. Moreover, these 3 different kiliocosm domains all contained different kiliocosm rules. Lin Feng also found it very miraculous that they could exist in an internal kiliocosm domain at the same time. At the very least, this was unprecedented among the other controller supremacies, be it Supremacy Round Heart or Supremacy Magnum. In fact, there was no record of anyone who could accommodate other different kiliocosm domains in their internal kiliocosm domains in cultivation texts of the past. All controllers only had worlds in their internal kiliocosm domain. It was impossible for them to accommodate other kiliocosm domains. However, Lin Feng could accommodate other kiliocosm domains. Moreover, these 3 kiliocosm domains were all grown by Lin Feng after devouring 1-star boundary stones. Moreover, as Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain grew, the chaotic lotus also seemed to be growing. In the past, if he devoured a 1-star boundary stone and wanted to produce a kiliocosm domain, it would definitely consume a lot of energy. But now, although there was some depletion, it was not much. For example, the 10 million level 1-star boundary stone that Lin Feng had devoured previously might have a limit of more than 80 million worlds, but now, it had managed to give rise to a kiliocosm domain comparable to 80 million worlds. Millions of worlds were lost, but compared to before, such losses were already very little. Lin Feng even felt that in the future, as his internal kiliocosm domain continued to grow, and the chaotic lotus continued to improve, if he devoured high-quality boundary stones again, there might not even be any more losses. With 80 million worlds, in addition to his previous combat power of 170 million worlds, Lin Feng's current internal kiliocosm domain now had the combat power of a total of 250 million worlds. How terrifying was this? It was almost twice as powerful as the indefinite sect master back then. Lin Feng had only been in this ancient battlefield for a month. In fact, it had only been a few hours since he discovered this 10 million level 1-star boundary stone. This speed of improvement was simply shocking. However, this could also be considered Lin Feng's luck. He was able to encounter such a high-quality 10 million level 1-star boundary stone. As you see, a boundary stone could only be chanced upon by luck. Relative to quantity, Lin Feng also yearned for quality. If he could find many high-quality boundary stones, he might as well plunder those instead of searching for ordinary boundary stones one by one. It's time to go deeper. The more dangerous a place is, the more likely it is to nurture high-quality boundary stones. Lin Feng had already tasted the benefits. After plundering the surroundings, he realized that there were not many boundary stones left, so he continued to venture deeper. Just now, it was just an ancient battlefield, and there seemed to be powerful entities that had fought and even fallen here before. It was why the remnant rule storms were so terrifying. That was precisely how such a high-quality 1-star boundary stone could be produced. Lin Feng continued to venture deeper and discovered some boundary stones one after another. However, while there were also scattered boundary stones of high quality, he never encountered another 1-star boundary stone. Finally, Lin Feng felt as if he had reached the end. He could clearly sense that he had already arrived at the end of a kiliocosm domain. Beyond the end of the kiliocosm domain was an infinite and empty place. However, that empty area still belonged to the ancient battlefield, and it was an incomparably dangerous place in the ancient battlefield. This was because an unprecedentedly huge mass of rules was entrenched in that empty area, sweeping violently in all directions at every moment. The terrifying rule storm made even Lin Feng's expression change. Could it be that there was once a kiliocosm domain? Someone destroyed the entire kiliocosm domain with a single strike. The more Lin Feng observed, the heavier his heart became. Destroying a kiliocosm domain was actually very easy. Forget about Lin Feng, even one-star supremacies like Supremacy Round Heart and Supremacy Magnum could easily do it. Even if Lin Feng was to destroy a kiliocosm domain now, it was impossible for him to leave no trace at all and reduce everything into ashes. That was impossible unless he devoured the entire kiliocosm domain. If this empty region in front of him was really once a kiliocosm domain in the past, it would be too terrifying. There were even two terrifying types of rules entrenched in it. There were only two rules. One seemed to be the rules of fire, and the other seemed to be the rules of wind. Apart from that, there were no other rules. This was even stranger. It had to be known that along the way, Lin Feng had seen only too many rules. Usually, all kinds of rules were intertwined. It was very difficult to see places with only two types of rules. There was only one possibility, and that was that these two types of rules were too powerful, far above other rules. Even other rules did not dare to approach them. Or, all the rules that approached were destroyed by these two types of rules and reduced to ashes. If that was really the case, it would be too terrifying. How powerful must the owners of these two types of rules have been while they were alive? After all, even among two-star supremacies, rules also had distinctions in power level. This depended on the power of the internal kiliocosm domain of the supremacy. The rules of a supremacy controller with 1 billion worlds were definitely stronger than the rules of a supremacy controller with 100 million worlds. There was no doubt about it. Of course, the prerequisite was that the rules were all the same, unlike Lin Feng's rules of time. This was one of the mysterious types of rules. Just like the rules of space, it was very special. Where there's danger, there's reward. There's very likely to be huge rewards. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. There were only two supreme types of rules in such a huge area. How many boundary stones would be produced inside? Or rather, how high quality would the boundary stones produced be? Lin Feng found it hard to imagine, but wealth was found in perilous odds. In such a dangerous place, there were naturally great rewards. Hence, Lin Feng no longer hesitated. He immediately mobilized all the power in his internal kiliocosm domain and supported the rules of time with all his might, covering only a radius of 100 feet. Buzz! Lin Feng darted into this dangerous area. As soon as he entered, the balance between the two supreme types of rules seemed to be broken. Endless rules came from all directions, pouncing towards Lin Feng in a frenzy. Even Lin Feng, who was used to seeing major scenes, actually felt his heart palpitate at this moment. Fortunately, his rules of time were very miraculous and were supported by the 250 million worlds in his body. All the rules that pounced towards him also stopped instantly under the rules of time. It was just that this way the consumption would be rather huge, but Lin Feng could still hold out. Hence, he sped up. He had to get something as soon as possible and leave this place. Staying here the entire time, Lin Feng also felt a sense of trepidation. Then, how terrifying must the owners of these rules have been when they were alive? Lin Feng fell into deep thought. Actually, after coming to this ancient battlefield, Lin Feng became more and more surprised. What was worth so many experts fighting with their lives? It had to be known that all the owners of these rules were powerful when they were alive. Lin Feng even had a vague feeling that they were all experts above two-star supremacies. Two-star supremacies wouldn't risk their lives unless absolutely necessary. Back when the indefinite sect master fought with Supremacy 7 treasures, neither side insisted on fighting to the death. However, they all took the initiative to retreat when there was not much hope of victory. The indefinite sect master could even abandon the indefinite sect. What else was worth risking his life for? Instead, in the end, the indefinite sect master lost his life for the mystery of time and was killed by Lin Feng. However, that was also because the indefinite sect master never expected to be killed by Lin Feng. If he had known that Lin Feng had the strength to kill a two-star supremacy, the indefinite sect master probably would not have dared to take the risk. A two-star supremacy had an infinitely long lifespan. In the entire small kiliocosm's infinite kiliocosm, they were also entities standing at the peak. There might no longer be anything that could make a two-star supremacy risk their lives. At the very least, if he asked himself honestly, would Lin Feng really sacrifice his life for the first light? Impossible. No matter how many boundary stones were offered, it was impossible for Lin Feng to really risk his life. Just like now, although it seemed like Lin Feng was taking a risk, in reality he had the spatial disk as well as the spacetime imprint. He actually had backstops and a huge guarantee of safety. That was why he had ventured into this ancient battlefield. Otherwise, he would also be very cautious, and would not take risks unless absolutely necessary. If this was the case for Lin Feng, the owners of these rules were clearly much stronger than Lin Feng. Why had they fought to the death here? What were they fighting over? All kinds of thoughts flashed through Lin Feng's mind, but this ancient battlefield was too old. It was so old that it was impossible to tell how ancient it was. Hence, Lin Feng could not discern anything either. He could only continue to explore. The deeper he went, the more Lin Feng could sense the two types of rules intertwining deeper and battling more intensely. It was as if there was something in the depths that drove both types of rules insane. Strange, there are no boundary stones. Not a single one. Lin Feng found it a little strange that there were no boundary stones. It had to be known that, from what he had seen of the ancient battlefield, it was filled with boundary stones almost everywhere. Only here were there two types of rules, yet no boundary stones. No, it's not that there are no boundary stones, but the two types of rules only gave rise to two boundary stones, two high-quality boundary stones of top grade. Lin Feng muttered softly, his voice filled with excitement. He shuttled through the two types of rules against the pressure. Finally, he saw two high-quality boundary stones in the depths ahead, where the two types of rules were intertwined the deepest. Lin Feng could tell at a glance that these were 10 million level one-star boundary stones, and were even very top-notch one-star boundary stones. Moreover, two had appeared at once. Even the strong-willed Lin Feng could no longer maintain his composure at this moment. I must get the two one-star boundary stones. Lin Feng had a very strong feeling. These were two one-star boundary stones, and they were both at the 10 million level. He had to obtain them. This was simply a greater gain than plundering hundreds or thousands of kiliocosm domains. After all, even hundreds or thousands of kiliocosm domains might not be able to give rise to a one-star boundary stone, let alone 10 million level one-star boundary stones. And now there were two in front of Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng did not dare to act rashly. For some reason, perhaps it was intuition, Lin Feng had a vague feeling that these two boundary stones could not be touched. Otherwise, he would definitely encounter danger, and it would be life-threatening danger. At Lin Feng's level, a sudden premonition was definitely not as simple as just a premonition. It was very likely to become a reality. I'll be in danger? Lin Feng carefully reflected his own strength. The combat power of 250 million worlds could already be considered very strong. In addition, he had the rules of time which covered his entire body at all times. How could he encounter danger in such a state? That was, unless there was some power that could crush Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain in an instant. Even the rules of time could not withstand that power, and would collapse instantly. Of course, the rules of time would not collapse. What would collapse was Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain. If the power was too great, the rules of time would demand from the internal kiliocosm domain in a frenzy. Once it exceeded a certain limit, the internal kiliocosm domain would fail to withstand the burden and collapse. In other words, Lin Feng's premonition was that a power which exceeded Lin Feng's limit would instantly defeat him and put him in danger. Of course, that sense of danger was not very strong. In other words, it could still be resisted, but he had to be prepared in advance. Lin Feng checked carefully. The two types of the rules were everywhere here. These two types of rules were very, very strong. If their owners were still alive, Lin Feng would definitely not be their match. However, since they had already fallen, no matter how strong they were, how much power could be left in the remnant rules? At this thought, Lin Feng no longer hesitated. He took out the spatial disk and was even prepared to activate the spacetime imprint at any time. Moreover, the rules of time covered his entire body at all times. He also raised the power of his internal kiliocosm domain to the limit. After making these preparations, Lin Feng immediately stepped forward. Boom! Lin Feng took a step forward. This step was like a thunderclap. When he suddenly approached the two one-star boundary stones, the two types of rules seemed to have gone completely wild. Waves of terrifying power enveloped Lin Feng from all directions. Humph! Stop time! Lin Feng was already prepared. The rules of time covered his entire body, like a reef in the waves. No matter how the waves crashed, they did not move. However, the rioting rules this time clearly far exceeded Lin Feng's expectations, and they were infinite. Even Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain was completely shaken, and it consumed a lot of energy. If he continued to stay inside, he would not be able to hold out for long at all. Fortunately, Lin Feng did not have to stay here for long. He had already arrived in front of these two one-star boundary stones. He reached out to grab them. Buzz. When Lin Feng grabbed the two boundary stones, strangely enough, the surrounding rioting rules instantly subsided. However, at the same time, a terrifying power was transmitted into Lin Feng's body from the two boundary stones. Boom! This force was too strong. So strong that even Lin Feng's rules of time seemed unable to resist it. In an instant, the internal kiliocosm domain exceeded its capacity, and countless worlds were on the verge of collapse. Suppress! Lin Feng's expression changed drastically. He did not expect the danger to actually come from the two one-star boundary stones. However, he was definitely unwilling to let go at this moment. Hence, he could only mobilize the power of his internal kiliocosm domain and constantly use the rules of time to suppress the two one-star boundary stones in a frenzy. The two one-star boundary stones were still restless, as if they were trying to break free from Lin Feng's palm. This seemed to be fundamentally different from other boundary stones. It was very abnormal. However, now that they were already in Lin Feng's hands, how could Lin Feng give up? Swoosh! Lin Feng's figure flashed, and he left this dangerous area directly. The further he went, the weaker the struggles of the two one-star boundary stones became. Could the two boundary stones still mobilize the power of these two rules? Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat as he thought of a possibility. Hence, he retreated in a frenzy. The two types of rules seemed to have erupted instantly under the guidance of the two one-star boundary stones, sweeping towards Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng retreated rapidly. There were also countless rules there. Even though these rules were far inferior to those two rules, there were many of them, 10 times, 100 times more than those two rules. Hence, these two rules quickly became entangled with countless rules, and could no longer supply power to the two one-star boundary stones. Gradually, the power of the two one-star boundary stones became weaker and weaker. In the end, they were completely suppressed by the power of Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain. Swoosh! Lin Feng heaved a long sigh of relief. That was a really close call just now. If he had fallen into the entanglement of those two types of rules, he could only enter a battle of attrition now. Looking at the two types of rules, Lin Feng might not be able to win in a battle of attrition. In the end, Lin Feng might even have no choice but to activate the spatial disk and warp space to leave this area. That would be a waste of an opportunity to warp with the spatial disk. Fortunately, Lin Feng seized the opportunity quickly and retreated directly to the ancient battlefield, causing the two types of rules to be caught up in a chaotic battle with various rules. Naturally, they could no longer supply power to the two one-star boundary stones. Lin Feng was still not assured. He retreated very far and almost exited the ancient battlefield. Only after temporarily exiting the ancient battlefield could Lin Feng relax slightly. In any case, he was already familiar with the path to the ancient battlefield. He would just return when he was ready. It would not take long. Safety was more important, especially these two strange one-star boundary stones. Lin Feng had simply never heard of boundary stones that could mobilize the power of rules. Let me see what kind of boundary stone you are. You're actually so miraculous. Lin Feng flipped his palm, and two boundary stones lay quietly in his palm. These two boundary stones were dozens of times larger than ordinary boundary stones. There were also patterns on them, which was very strange. In particular, these patterns seemed to represent a trace of the rules of fire and a trace of the rules of wind. They looked very vivid and lifelike. However, when Lin Feng took a closer look, he realized that these were not patterns. They were clearly cracks. But the cracks appeared to have been there for a long time and were not easy to see. He had thought that they were patterns. Cracks? These are not complete one-star boundary stones. Could it be? A bold thought suddenly appeared in Lin Feng's mind. Could these be two-star boundary stones? Two-star boundary stones. He had almost never seen a two-star boundary stone. The fact that Supremacy First Light could go insane over a two-star boundary stone and even sell out the entire First Light was enough to show how precious a two-star boundary stone was. However, after his ecstasy, Lin Feng gradually calmed down. No, these are not two-star boundary stones. Lin Feng frowned. It was too strange. He had seen many boundary stones, including many one-star boundary stones. These two boundary stones did look like they were only at the level of one-star boundary stones, but they were very different from ordinary one-star boundary stones. They looked as if they had shattered. However, they were definitely not two-star boundary stones because there was no stronger fluctuation. The fluctuations of the two boundary stones were not even as powerful as the previous one-star boundary stone with 80 million worlds. Although they were also 10 million level boundary stones, they fluctuated around 50 million worlds. Such an aura was definitely not that of two-star boundary stones, but they had some vague characteristics of two-star boundary stones. In particular, they seemed to be able to mobilize the previous two types of rules. Lin Feng could not help but have more guesses. Could these two boundary stones be the boundary stones used by the owners of those two types of rules to open up their internal world when they were alive? It was just that, after they fell in the great battle, the boundary stones shattered. Instead, over time, the fragments gradually accumulated power to form new boundary stones, hence becoming one-star boundary stones. Lin Feng thought of this possibility. Moreover, wouldn't the cracks on the two boundary stones prove Lin Feng's hypothesis? If that was really the case, could this kind of boundary stone fragment in someone else's body be devoured? Lin Feng had such reservations because he knew that he could not devour the boundary stones in the bodies of the other controllers. If that was possible, everyone would have devoured each other long ago. However, these two boundary stones were not entirely the boundary stones in other people's bodies. Instead, they had undergone complicated changes, which was how they slowly became boundary stones. I'll give it a try. In the end, Lin Feng could not bear to give up on these two boundary stones. Hence, he threw the two boundary stones into the internal Kiliacosm domain. Immediately, the roots of the chaotic lotus quickly pierced into the two boundary stones. Buzz. Buzz. Lin Feng's chaotic lotus actually shook for the first time. This was unprecedented. The chaotic lotus could devour almost everything. This had never happened before. Just as Lin Feng felt that something had gone wrong and was about to stop, images suddenly appeared in his mind. The content of these images made Lin Feng's eyes widen in shock. The images were intermittent, but they all pointed to the scene of a certain battle at the same time. There vaguely appeared to be two powerful controllers. They seemed to control the Kiliacosm domain rules of fire and rules of wind. The two experts were both two-star supremacies, and they should be the best among two-star supremacies. At the very least, even with the rules of time, Lin Feng still felt his heart palpitate before those terrifying Kiliacosm domain rules. Moreover, every time the power of the worlds erupted, worlds would collapse, and Kiliacosm domains would be destroyed and reduced to ashes. Destroying a Kiliacosm domain was not difficult. Even the aftershock could easily destroy a Kiliacosm domain. However, it would not be easy to destroy a Kiliacosm domain and reduce it into ashes. When such experts fought, it was simply devastating. The images were incomplete, and many of them were lost and intermittent. Lin Feng had a vague guess that these images should be remnant images in the two boundary stones. They were actually some memories left in the boundary stones in the bodies of the two supremacies back then. After all, strictly speaking, these two boundary stones were fragments of the boundary stones in the bodies of the two supremacies. However, it had been far too long. It was how they became two one-star boundary stones again. Looking at the battle between the two controllers, Lin Feng speculated that their internal worlds must both exceed 10 billion in number. He was actually being conservative in his estimations. It might be above 100 billion worlds. After all, Lin Feng did not know how terrifying the power of 10 billion or 100 billion worlds in the internal kiliocosm domain would be. He could only speculate slightly. Why are two experts above the level of two-star supremacy engaged in a life-or-death battle? From the screen, the two of them did not hold back at all. They were both fighting wildly, almost ready to kill the other at the cost of their own life, regardless of the injuries. Lin Feng was very shocked. What could make two experts above the level of two-star supremacy risk their lives at all costs? This was really not in line with Lin Feng's understanding of one-star and two-star supremacies. However, these images were all very broken, and neither party spoke. Lin Feng did not know the reason either. The scene was still playing. Lin Feng focused and listened to the voices in the scene. He wanted to know why these two experts were fighting with their lives. Incomplete images kept flickering. As time passed, Lin Feng also vaguely sensed that there might not be many images left. Just as Lin Feng was checking the incomplete images, two complete images suddenly appeared in Lin Feng's mind. Moreover, on the images, Lin Feng heard the conversation between the two experts for the first time. Supremacy torch, this 3-star boundary stone must be mine. I've waited too long. I've already waited for an epoch. I can't wait anymore. Now that this epoch is about to end, I'm not sure if I can withstand the destruction of this epoch. Only by obtaining this 3-star boundary stone can I become a 3-star supremacy and survive one after another epochal cataclysm. Supremacy Anemo, you need this 3-star boundary stone, but don't I need it too? You're an expert who has survived an epoch after all, and have some experience. However, I'm a supremacy who only rose to power in this epoch. Now I can no longer advance. Faced with the imminent destruction of the epoch, only by obtaining this 3-star boundary stone can I have a chance of becoming a 3-star supremacy and surviving the destruction of this epoch. Hence, I won't give up. I must obtain this 3-star boundary stone at all costs. Very well. The epoch is about to end, and great calamity is nigh. No one can avoid it. In that case, let's fight. The winner is the hero, and the loser is the villain. Only the winner is qualified to possess this 3-star boundary stone. The scene ended here. There was neither the final outcome of the two supremacy experts, nor any other scene. However, from the current state of things, two boundary stones containing the rules of wind and fire were enough to explain the matter. The two of them were both outstanding 2-star supremacies, but in the end, they perished together in a fight. As for the 3-star boundary stone, perhaps someone else had obtained it, or perhaps it had been lost. In short, too much time had passed. It was impossible for Lin Feng to find the 3-star boundary stone. However, what Lin Feng was concerned about was not the whereabouts of the 3-star boundary stone, but the key information revealed by this scene. It made him overwhelmed with emotions, and he could not calm down for a long time. An epoch? What is an epoch? From their words, Lin Feng could tell that this epochal cataclysm seemed capable of destroying everything. Even 2-star supremacies had to struggle to survive, and there was a high chance that they would fail. At that time, they would be annihilated and fall completely. It seemed like only a 3-star supremacy could withstand one after another epochal cataclysm. However, be it at the opulent lodge or the first light, Lin Feng had never heard of the epochal cataclysm. This might be the core secret of the entire small kiliocosm. In order to survive the epochal cataclysm, Supremacy Torch and Supremacy Anemo were even willing to risk their lives to fight for that 3-star boundary stone. However, both of them had fallen. Perhaps neither of them managed to obtain that 3-star boundary stone. Before the epochal cataclysm arrived, the two of them were already dead. It was lamentable. Could it be that so many controller supremacies fought and even fell in this ancient battlefield just to fight for that 3-star boundary stone? Lin Feng already had a vague guess. Moreover, he felt that it was probably close to the mark. A 3-star boundary stone itself was enough to drive people insane. Coupled with the threat of epical cataclysm, it was indeed enough to make even top 2-star supremacies risk their lives. Lin Feng memorized the epical cataclysm. He felt that this might be the core secret of the small kiliacosm. It might involve a lot of things. He had to figure it out. However, the top priority now was to increase his strength. Be it Supremacy Anemo or Supremacy Torch, their strength was probably 100 times that of Lin Feng. However, even such powerful supremacies did not obtain the 3-star boundary stone in the end. It was enough to show that there were 2-star supremacies who were even stronger than them. Lin Feng's little amount of strength was nothing much. The more he advanced to higher realms, the more Lin Feng felt his inadequacies, and how insignificant he was. At the very least, with Lin Feng's current strength, it would probably be difficult for him to even cross the hurdle of Opulent Lodge. The chaotic lotus in Lin Feng's body gradually devoured the 2 1-star boundary stones. Although there were some memories, they were no longer fragments of 2-star boundary stones after all. Instead, after billions of years of change, they had become 1-star boundary stones. Hence, the chaotic lotus could still devour them. After devouring, 2 huge kiliacosm domains grew out slowly. Although these 2 massive kiliacosm domains could not compare to the kiliacosm domain that grew from the 1-star boundary stone equivalent to 80 million worlds, they were still 10 million level boundary stones. Every kiliacosm domain was comparable to about 50 million worlds. The combination of 2 kiliacosm domains was equivalent to 100 million worlds, almost equivalent to an ordinary 2-star supremacy. Moreover, the kiliacosm domain rules of the 2 kiliacosms were indeed rules of fire and wind. As the number of kiliacosm domains in Lin Feng's body increased, every kiliacosm domain came with kiliacosm domain rules. They actually did not conflict with Lin Feng's internal kiliacosm domain rules, and were instead very harmonious. It was as if Lin Feng's internal kiliacosm domain rules were high and mighty, suppressing everything. However, no matter the reason, Lin Feng was already completely different from ordinary controllers. At the very least, among the controllers he had met so far, be it 1-star supremacy or 2-star supremacy, none of them had 2 kiliacosm domains in their body. Only Lin Feng had far more than 2 kiliacosm domains in his body, but several. Moreover, every kiliacosm domain was very massive. The kiliacosm domain rules were all very powerful, and they were all different. He had attained the combat power of 350 million worlds. With such powerful strength, even the Indefinite Sect Master and Supremacy 7 treasures combined would probably be far from Lin Feng's match. It was the combat power of 350 million worlds. If he had not come to this ancient battlefield, Lin Feng might not have been able to improve to this extent even if he cultivated for 1,000,000 years. In comparison, other 2-star supremacies might only be able to improve by a little in billions of years, or even find it difficult to improve at all. To Lin Feng, forget about billions of years, even 10 or 100 years would bring about a vast change. There was no knowing how great the changes would be. Lin Feng also deeply understood the various benefits of transforming into a universe without any limiting bottlenecks. In the beginning, he had not realized it, but ever since he became a 1-star supremacy, Lin Feng had experienced the benefits. After becoming a 2-star supremacy, the various benefits of transforming into a universe were vividly reflected. It was envied by countless controller supremacies. I haven't even explored 1/10 of this ancient battlefield. Such a place can only be chanced upon by luck. I have to explore it all. At the very least, I have to know the whereabouts of that 3-star boundary stone. As Lin Feng looked at the ancient battlefield in front of him, thoughts flashed through his mind. Although he did not think that the 3-star boundary stone was still here, he sensed that Supremacy Torch and Supremacy Anemo were fighting over that 3-star boundary stone. Lin Feng was very curious. In the end, who had obtained that 3-star boundary stone? Had the supremacy expert who obtained that 3-star boundary stone really become a 3-star supremacy, survived the epical cataclysm, and even survived until now? Lin Feng did not know. All of this still had to be explored and confirmed slowly. The ancient battlefield might be dangerous, but it also contained opportunities. No one could quickly convert opportunities into strength in danger like Lin Feng. This way, he could almost nurture battle through battle, continue to take risks, and increase his strength. Now, Lin Feng's power of 350 million worlds was already almost twice as strong as before he came to the ancient battlefield. This was Lin Feng's characteristic. Transforming into a universe would allow him to advance without any bottlenecks or limitations, and he would not be restricted by the problem of the boundary stone. Even if he did not have a 1-star or 2-star boundary stone, it would not impede him from becoming a 1-star or 2-star supremacy at all. It was the same for the 3-star supremacy. Even without a 3-star boundary stone, it would not impede Lin Feng from becoming a 3-star supremacy. Swoosh! Lin Feng stepped into the ancient battlefield again. This time, he wanted to go deeper. The combat power of 350 million worlds also gave him more confidence to go deeper into the center of the ancient battlefield. Lin Feng had a vague feeling that perhaps the secret of this ancient battlefield was hidden in its deepest recesses. As Lin Feng continued to venture deeper, he passed through the place where the two types of rules intertwined just now, and arrived at a sea of lightning almost formed completely from rules of lightning. The densely packed rules of lightning spread throughout the Kiliacosm domain corridor were even stronger than the previous Kiliacosm domain rules of Supremacy Torch and Supremacy Anemo. Could this be the core area of the ancient battlefield? Crack. Lin Feng approached this sea of lightning gently. He activated a wisp of rules of lightning, and it immediately bounced to Lin Feng's side. Boom! Just a wisp of rules of lightning had actually shaken the Kiliacosm domain in Lin Feng's body. Although the rules of time resisted this wisp of rules of lightning, it placed a huge burden on his internal Kiliacosm domain. This was only a wisp of rules. Lin Feng was simply shocked to the extreme. Compared to this entire sea of lightning, a mere wisp of rules was nothing. Lin Feng was dumbfounded. He knew that he would have to stop here. If he dared to step forward and fell into the sea of lightning, his internal Kiliacosm domain would probably collapse in an instant, and he would not even have time to use the spatial disk. In fact, even the chance of activating the spacetime imprint would be very slim. What kind of entity left behind these rules? Lin Feng found it hard to imagine who had left behind these rules. Who could leave behind such an enormous sea of lightning? Could it be a 3-star supremacy? However, why would a 3-star supremacy fight for a 3-star boundary stone? Intuitively, Lin Feng felt that it was impossible for it to be a 3-star supremacy. However, if they were only a 2-star supremacy, how terrifying must their internal worlds be? 100 billion worlds? Or even more than 1 trillion worlds? Lin Feng did not know, because the gap between 2-star and 3-star supremacies was too great. There was no specific quantity for a 2-star and 3-star supremacies, or even a specific method of measurement. Lin Feng only knew that a 3-star supremacy possessed the power of half a Kiliacosm. As for how many worlds it took for the power of half a Kiliacosm, most 2-star supremacies probably did not know. This was a vague standard of measurement. Or perhaps Lin Feng had not reached the level of breaking through to the level of a 3-star supremacy. Hence, he did not know the exact boundary point between a 2-star supremacy and a 3-star supremacy. However, the small Kiliacosm was too vast. Even a top 2-star supremacy could not travel through the entire small Kiliacosm. As for how majestic a 3-star supremacy with the power of half a Kiliacosm was, Lin Feng did not know either. Still, without a doubt, if this sea of lightning was left behind by a 2-star supremacy, what was truly terrifying was not the owner of this sea of lightning, but the expert who killed the owner of this sea of lightning. That was what was truly terrifying. If they were really fighting for the 3-star boundary stone, the 3-star boundary stone might very well fall into the hands of the expert who killed the owner of this sea of lightning in the end. Boundary stones. So many boundary stones. Lin Feng took a look. This sea of lightning was very, very huge, probably as huge as dozens of Kiliacosm domains. Just the remnant power of rules was spread throughout dozens of Kiliacosm domains. How terrifying must the owner of the Sea of Lightning have been when he was alive? Moreover, as far as Lin Feng could see, There were boundary stones almost everywhere in the Sea of Lightning. On top of that, the quality of the boundary stones was incredible. The quality of the boundary stones nurtured by this Sea of Lightning was naturally top-notch. If he could devour them all, and had enough world origin, how many worlds worth of combat power would Lin Feng gain? A billion? Or billions, or even tens of billions? Lin Feng did not know, but it was all possible. Unfortunately, Lin Feng did not dare to step into it. Even though he had the spatial disk, the space-time imprint, and the rules of time, he did not dare to step into this Sea of Lightning. It was too dangerous. In fact, just approaching it slightly gave Lin Feng a feeling of trepidation. Lin Feng thought of all kinds of methods and lingered near the Sea of Lightning for more than a month. But he still could not find a way to enter the Sea of Lightning. He even circled the Sea of Lightning and accurately estimated the range of this Sea of Lightning. It should be the size of 33 kiliocosm domains. Even Lin Feng could not help but be shocked by such a huge range. It was unimaginable that a supremacy could leave behind rules that occupied an area as massive as the 33 kiliocosm domains after their death. Perhaps the Sea of Lightning did not occupy the entire range of the 33 kiliocosm domains. However, without a doubt, one had to enter the Sea of Lightning to enter the most central area. Otherwise, the secret of this ancient battlefield might remain hidden. I'm really reluctant to accept this. However, I can only wait until my strength has increased in the future to investigate. In the end, Lin Feng chose to leave. He glanced at the Sea of Lightning from afar, knowing that the Sea of Lightning contained a large amount of boundary stones, and that the secrets of the ancient battlefield might also be contained in the Sea of Lightning. However, his strength was not enough to venture into this Sea of Lightning. He could only leave with regrets now. Lin Feng remembered this place firmly. He could only explore it after improving his strength in the future. Hence, Lin Feng left the ancient battlefield and returned to the First Light. In the opulent lodge, Supremacy 7 Treasures had a solemn expression, and there was a faint trace of excitement in his eyes. In his vision, a huge pitch-black tunnel had already appeared and was gradually stabilizing. After passage was stabilized, people could descend. Moreover, the more stable the passage, the more experts could descend. Otherwise, the descent of a slightly stronger supremacy would compress the passage and cause it to collapse. A very powerful supremacy would definitely descend from such a stable descension passage this time. However, he did not know which supremacy it was. But, as the descension passage stabilized, a light flashed inside, and a light suddenly descended from the medium kiliocosm. Supremacy 7 Treasures knew that a supremacy had descended. Oh! Is this the small kiliocosm I'm descending to this time? A white-robed man had already appeared outside the descension passage. Supremacy 7 Treasures took a closer look and was immediately shocked. However, a respectful expression appeared on his face at once. He quickly walked up and bowed respectfully. 7 Treasures greets Supremacy Vicissitude. I didn't expect the headquarters to actually send Supremacy Vicissitude to descend this time. I believe that with Supremacy Vicissitude presiding over here, the forces of our opulent lodge in this small kiliocosm can already be considered stabilized. Supremacy 7 Treasures knew this Supremacy Vicissitude very well. This person was far stronger than Supremacy 7 Treasures, and his status in the opulent lodge was also far higher than Supremacy 7 Treasures. Hence, although they were both 2-star supremacies, Supremacy 7 Treasures had to be very respectful to Supremacy Vicissitude. Supremacy Vicissitude glanced at Supremacy 7 Treasures, then nodded and said, His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign is already very displeased that you failed to maintain the descension passage last time, and allowed it to be destroyed. This time, His Majesty has ordered that the opulent lodge must expand as soon as possible, and strive to seize the initiative in this small kiliocosm as soon as possible. After all, the 6th epochal cataclysm is in the near future for this small kiliocosm. We have to obtain sufficient resources before the epochal cataclysm arrives. Otherwise, when it does, everything will be reduced to ashes. Yes, 7 Treasures will definitely obey His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign's orders and complete the mission as soon as possible. Hearing about the epical cataclysm, Supremacy 7 Treasure's heart skipped a beat. He knew very well how terrifying the epical cataclysm was. If he failed to satisfy His Majesty the Kiliakosm Sovereign, His Majesty the Kiliakosm Sovereign only needed to let them fend for themselves in this small Kiliakosm, stop maintaining the dissension passage, and refuse to fetch them to the medium Kiliakosm. Then, even without the Kiliakosm Sovereign's help, two-star supremacies like them had a high chance of failing to survive the epical cataclysm, turning into ashes and falling completely. Supremacy Vicissitude, please follow me to rest first. However, Supremacy Vicissitude shook his head. He looked at the dissension passage and said meaningfully, "There's no hurry. The dissension isn't over yet." "It's not over yet?" Supremacy 7 Treasures was slightly stunned. He looked up at the dissension passage in the distance again. Indeed, the dissension passage did not close after a supremacy had descended as usual. Instead, its original state was maintained, and there were faint signs of other supremacies descending.